everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, it is the end of June, and we darn near missed out on our opportunity to provide a podcast for the month of June after promising our listeners that they would get one each month of the off season. But never fear, we are here, and we are going to put together I think a little bit of a different show, because there hasn't been like a ton of really hard news that we'd like to delve into that hasn't been covered pretty extensively by Tony and Tom on the Buckeye Weekly, and and you and I aren't like huge recruitniks, so I would say that I think this is going to be kind of a fun episode for our listeners.
I certainly hope so, and I would make the statement that better late than never, kind of like the fact that we're getting it in under the wire, but we are getting it in, and as you said, Gerd and Tom have been giving the Ozone podcast listeners frequent updates as it relates to the Ohio State recruiting commitments that have been coming in, and I think our show tonight, I think we're going to give kind of a different perspective on some different Ohio State news as it relates to the football program.
Yeah. So, and of course, Chip, the Buckeyes just had a really big recruiting weekend, and we didn't see a ton out of that, like maybe people expected, and certainly not right away, but a few more additions for future Buckeye teams.
Yes, and from what I understand, and I don't want to presume any, because there are different names being bandied about in terms of, this guy has Ohio State as the favorite or as the presumed favorite, and all of that. As you said, we don't really fancy ourselves as being heavily involved in the pulse of Ohio State recruiting, but the commitments that did come out as a result of that big barbecue weekend a week ago was a defensive back, a cornerback by the name of Clark Phillips out of California. He actually gave his verbal commitment prior to the barbecue starting. He arrived in Columbus. He did I believe an on-site commitment via CBS Sports. He's one of the top cornerbacks in the United States. So this is kind of speaking very well to Jeff Hafley, the new co-defensive coordinator, his recruiting prowess, his reputation as a strong developer of defensive backs is certainly being credited with Clark Phillips' commitment. And also prior to the barbecue, a 2021 commitment came in, a wide receiver, Jaden Ballard out of Massillon, Ohio. Again, he's not going to be signing with Ohio State until 2021. Mm-hmm. I like the way that Gerd put it is that he not only plays for Massillon, he also wears number 9, and the only difference that Gerd can see among the differences between Ballard and former Massillon and Ohio State star Devin Smith is the fact that I guess Ballard has more flowing hair under his helmet than Devin Smith used to, but the same propensity for big plays, stretching the field as a deep threat. That's kind of what Ohio State fans should get accustomed to. And earlier this week, an offensive lineman out of Richfield Revere, offensive tackle Ben Christman, 6'6", 299, so very large, very talented young man on the offensive line. He committed earlier this week. So if there's anything that we can say as it relates to recruiting is, yes, we don't follow it, but I am feeling very comfortable that Ryan Day and his staff are hitting the trail very, very well. Is it crazy to think that the momentum for Ohio State recruiting has actually picked up since Urban Meyer announced he was going to hang up the coaching clipboard and whistle? It might be. The biggest difference that I see, and again, it's still early, and the results on the field have yet to be, the great thing about Ryan Day is that, yes, I understand he was undefeated in the interim per se, but As of right now, he is unscored upon. He is unbeaten. All the wonderful things like right now as the official head coach. But what I would say the biggest difference that I'm seeing as an Ohio State fan is Ohio State under Ryan Day, when it comes to Ohio prospects, they're pulling the trigger much faster. And I think, and this is not taking a shot at Urban Meyer, I'd be foolish to do so. These are some of the players that maybe not in the example of like a Ben Christman or Ballard for 2021, but there are a number of players on Ohio State's 2020 recruiting class, Jacob James, Trey LaRue. These are, even Ty Hamilton, who's the younger brother of Devon Hamilton. These are Ohio players that maybe Urban Meyer would have come back later in the recruiting cycle. And what I mean by later is, let's say October, November, that maybe they would come around to offering a scholarship to, whereas Ryan Day and his staff are making the offer now. And I think that's why you're seeing the Ohio prospects verbally committing now. I think that they feel the love, so to speak, that maybe that Urban Meyer made them come to camp and earn Ryan Day. And let's give credit to Mark Bantoni. I mean, he's still a very, very prominent member of that recruiting infrastructure that Urban Meyer had developed. That I think that they're coming up with the decision that these are talented players that we can either develop as Ohio State Buckeyes, or if we don't get on them right away, they have shown a tendency to go play for other teams within the Big Ten, and now you're competing against them. So I think Ryan Day is just being a little bit more proactive as it relates to the Ohio players. Yes, they may not necessarily be, 5-star players per se, but a 3-star player that has room for growth and development is nothing to turn down. And as I said a moment ago, these are quite often the kind of players that other Big Ten programs have not been reluctant in offering scholarships to, and then Ohio State has to play them on the field.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a big proponent of the Ohio guys, the Ohio players, and of course of Ohio players. That funk band out of Dayton back in the 70s with Love Roller Coaster and Fire. I've always been a fan of both of those things. So this has been fun for me. And also, I don't know about you, but there's something very comforting to me about having a Massillon Tiger commit to Ohio State.
Oh, certainly. I mean, since we're both very partial to Mr. Spielman, the idea of somebody who has played for one of the most storied programs, not only in the state of Ohio, but let's face it, across the entire country, Massillon football is well respected and well regarded. So I look at it from the idea that these are kids that play for a no-nonsense, no-frills program. They're used to playing in big games. They are well acquainted with the importance of tradition. Making the trip down from Massillon down to Columbus, Ohio, is just it's a step up, obviously, in the caliber of competition. But these are young men who are well used to playing in big games and playing for big programs.
Chip, do you have a favorite album by the Ohio players?
I do not have a favorite album per se, but if anything, like I said, I'm like you. I'm very partial to groups and artists from Ohio. Like just to kind of show my Cleveland roots. I'm younger, but I'm still very partial to the Michael Stanley Band. Back from the so. You certainly can't go wrong with Devo, being from Akron, the Pretenders. So I am very, 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 very much an Ohio boy at heart and in soul.
Please stay tuned later for information about Chip and I and our future music podcast that we're going to put together.
There you go.
All right, Chip. So we're going to have some fun with some questions today. We're going to just take some things that have been kind of out there in the media, and we're going to kind of give our own spin on them, I think. And the first question that you put together when I asked you to maybe throw some topics my way, and one of them was which incoming freshman who was not an early enrollee are you excited about, offense and defense? And I'll let you go first, Chip.
Okay. Do you want me to do both, or do you want me to just do one at a time?
You can do. Why don't we do one at a time? Why don't we start on the offensive side?
All right. So my offensive player, this may seem kind of off the wall and out of the blue, if you will, because let's face it, all the publicity usually goes stereotypically to the skill position players, the running backs, the wide receivers, the quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. This guy that I'm very intrigued by is incoming freshman offensive lineman Harry Miller. And the reason why, there are a number of reasons why. Harry Miller was considered one of the best offensive linemen in the country coming out of high school, was the high school valedictorian for his class. In his spare time, he likes to go and do missionary work and down in Nicaragua. So he's just, it sounds like a very, very well-rounded, high-quality character individual. Last fall, when everything was transpiring with Urban Meyer and his suspension and all of the negative press that was being directed at Ohio State's program in light of the Zach Smith situation, Ari Wasserman of The Athletic wrote an article about Harry Miller, and from what I understand, I don't want to go too in depth about it. Harry Miller's mother was a victim of domestic abuse prior to Harry Miller. I believe it may have been prior to when he was born or when he was an infant. I can't recall. It's been several months since I've read the article. And incidentally, I think even though it's usually on behind a paywall, I think The Athletic actually made this free. So it would be something that I would recommend reading. I'm going to go back and look at it again. But if anything, it just kind of spoke to the relationship that Harry Miller and his mother had developed with Urban Meyer, and it seems as though that strong relationship has obviously kept root with Ryan Day. But during getting back to Harry Miller's football prowess, even though he didn't participate in spring football, there were reports that Harry Miller would participate in offensive line meetings via video chat. So he was kind of, okay, if I can't be there in person, I'm going to be there remotely and trying to learn the offense and trying to learn the techniques as well as he could before making the move to Columbus. So I know it seems kind of like a strange player to pick, but considering the offensive line is certainly not set yet, with a number of open positions, it's going to be intriguing to me to see if Harry Miller can possibly crack the two deep, even as a true freshman along that offensive line.
Well, it's interesting that you picked Harry Miller because I actually was leaning toward picking Harry Miller myself.
Okay.
And because I like the big uglies up front, and I think to me he seems like a very important recruit from an offensive line standpoint, and potentially that next level guy that could be joining the ranks of the great centers that Ohio State has had in recent years. So, I don't know. I was thinking of that. But I'm going to go, even though we're really not sure what side of the ball he's going to play, I'm going to go with Steel Chambers just because of his name.
Good pick.
Steel Chambers is a guy who you got to have him on the field just so you can say his name. I mean, he's just got a great name. He's got a great football name. And, if he's playing running back, you've got – how great is it to have Steel Chambers as a silver bullet, though? It would also make sense to have him on the defense.
And from what I saw, because it's the freshmen are there now. I mean, all of the freshmen are on campus and participating in summer workouts. Mm-hmm. From what I saw on Twitter, is Steel Chambers is going to be wearing number 22. And the reason why that's prominent is Ohio State needed to ask for the permission from the family of Heisman Trophy winner Les Horvath,
right?
Because that number was retired. So they must think very, very highly of Steel Chambers, no matter what position he ultimately winds up playing, running back or linebacker,
right,
for them to give him number 22.
Is this the first time since Katzenmoyer got permission to wear 45 that this has happened?
I thought maybe since Justin Hilliard, he's wearing 47, and since Chick Harley was posthumously awarded 47, I thought was that was the case. But you might be right. It's definitely the kind of thing where it takes some special circumstances, regardless of whether we're talking. Katzenmoyer, the mystery, the great mystery to me is Troy Smith won the Heisman back in 2006, and it seems as though the number 10 has never been taken out of circulation, and that's
on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It seems as though okay. So I guess I don't know what the criteria, how that's changed, but you would have thought that the number 10 would have been taken out, but. Yeah, it's certainly, regardless of whether we're talking since Katzenmoyer, since we're talking about Horvath, if we're talking about Chick Harley, it's certainly any of those very prominent numbers that you see displayed within Ohio Stadium. It certainly takes some major pleading and I don't want to say begging by the incoming player, as well as from the football team, to the family's representatives.
They got to have a pretty strong case. They got to be a special player, or a player that they believe is a special player. So yeah, that's a good sign. I want to see things from Steel Chambers. I know he's a tremendous athlete, and I'm excited about him just for the name alone, let alone anything he brings with him from Roswell, Georgia. I'll start with the defensive side, since I let you go first on the offensive side, and I'm not going to be able to narrow this down to one for again silly reasons probably. But Chip, I'm going to go with, on the defensive side, Cade Stover and Tommy Eichenberg, and the reason that I'm excited about these guys is that, one, they're linebackers, and I'm always excited about linebackers. Two, they've got traditional Big Ten linebacker names. Eichenberg, that's a guy you can see lighting someone up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And same with Cade Stover. I mean, Stover is a sort of a violent sounding name. So I like these guys already. Good size. Stover 6'5", Eichenberg 6'3". They're both 235, but they'll put on some muscle in that program. Coach Mick will get them built up, and I think those are the guys I'm most excited seeing of the non-early enrollees.
I like both of those. As a matter of fact, Cade Stover was going to be my pick, but since you gave me the opportunity to kind of look for a second choice while you were describing, and your reasons are very worthwhile. The reason why I'm intrigued by Cade Stover, I'll just say, is that when he originally committed to Ohio State, his commitment video was pretty no frills. Cade Stover comes from a farming community. Mm-hmm. He's just one of these guys that he just looks to me like, no matter where you put him on the field, I think his first destination is going to be on special teams, but the probability that he's going to play linebacker, the possibility that he can grow into defensive end, this guy just looks like a football player. Mm-hmm. So I certainly commend you on the wisdom of your selection there. So forced into my second choice, and here's where it's going to get a little interesting, is nobody, even on the Ohio State staff, knows where this guy is truly going to line up on the defense, but he is going to line up on the defense, and that is athlete Craig Young. And when we talk about Craig Young, here's a guy who, out of Indiana, has tremendous speed. I think, it has been clocked maybe at like a 10,700. I may be mistaken. I don't want to speak falsely here, but played wide receiver in in high school football in Indiana, was one of those guys that when he showed up at Ohio State displayed enough athleticism that Urban Meyer offered him a scholarship, but also told him, hey, you need to be kind of concentrating more on the defensive side of the ball. Here's a guy that, when you think about it, he has the size to play linebacker, he has the speed to play in the secondary, and it's not completely beyond the realm of possibility that depending on what kind of good bulk that Mickey Marotti can put on him, he could possibly move up into the defensive end kind of look. Mm-hmm. So he's one of these guys that, and I'm not trying to put him in the same category, but a lot of people forget Sam Hubbard played safety for Cincinnati Moeller, and now he's collecting a paycheck in the NFL as a defensive end. So these are the kind of guys that are very raw coming in, but the athleticism that they showed in high school warranted their scholarship offer, and this is a guy that I think, similar to Cade Stover, I think he's going to first make his mark on special teams, and there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be interesting to see. I wouldn't be surprised if I have no idea about his coverage skills, but if he even gets a look at that hybrid bullet position, because if he has the ability to play linebacker and kind of drop back into coverage, maybe that's kind of what they're anticipating as well.
That would be insane to see him playing there at 6'4". I think that he's certainly a guy. You can't coach speed, as they say, and he's a guy that if you put him on the edge and just have him rush the passer, just from a speed standpoint, he's going to make some plays.
Mm-hmm.
So I like your pick too. I mean, it's a good recruiting class on paper. It looks really good. I mean, but until they get on the field and start doing things, it's hard to say what anything's going to happen. But I enjoyed this exercise, and I'm glad you came up with that one.
Thank you.
By the way, I've started a new job since you and I last did a podcast, and I have met a Georgia fan that I work with, and he's very upset with us for, as he says, stealing Justin Fields.
All right. Well, that being the case, you can just politely remind them that, all right, well, we did give them Dwan Mathis in return. And,
I did that. I actually did mention that. and Dwan had a medical issue that was kind of a scary thing. So he had to undergo a procedure, was what I was told. I hadn't actually meant to look this up, but I never did get around to it because I had somehow missed that news.
Yeah, I can't recall what it was very serious, but I sincerely, I'm happy to report that I believe that Dwan Mathis is out of the woods and is recovering from whatever it was that was ailing him.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to skip around with these that you gave me instead of going in order.
Sure.
I'm going to say, ESPN recently listed some of Ohio State's popular traditions. Which is your favorite? Now, I didn't read this piece, Chip. Do you happen to recall which traditions ESPN promoted or talked about?
They had several. They were kind of mocking the fact like Ohio State's favorite tradition now is beating Michigan on a regular basis, and that kind of unofficial tradition. But they listed several. I mean, the idea of Script Ohio, the idea of Carmen Ohio being sung after the game, like as there are so many traditions at Ohio State. I realize that one of the traditions that has been taken away from the student body just because of I guess you would say just the possibility of litigation, the Mirror Lake jump, all of these kind of things.
Did they talk about the skull session?
I can't recall if they did, but there's another great one. So when you think about all of the different traditions, when you think about Buckeye leaves on the helmet, that's kind of when that is actually this coming season will mark 51 years that Ohio State's been doing the Buckeye leaves. A lot of people thought that is something that had always been, but it wasn't until the 1968 season that the Buckeye leaves on the helmet became part of Ohio State football tradition. So there are so many that are out there. I just think that it was something, just to kind of get your favorite, I know I certainly have one. So.
Did you do any research on when sticker technology actually was invented?
I didn't do any research on that. I just know that I had the good fortune of seeing former Ohio State assistant coach Bill Conley during the season at a Buffalo Wild Wings on Bethel Road, because on a weekly basis during the season, Coach Conley, as well as some other people, go to a radio show performance out of the Bethel Road location. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to talk to Coach Conley, because it's kind of scary to think about. It was 24 years ago that I used to do some volunteer recruiting scouting for Ohio State, for Coach Conley. So I know him personally, and had the opportunity to introduce Coach Conley to my daughter, who is very, very strongly considering becoming a Buckeye herself. So Coach Conley did some recruiting of my daughter, Olivia. Not that it really is not much of a recruiting effort. I can share. She was pretty much hook, line, and sinker after everything she saw and heard during the academic overview. But anyway, yeah, Coach Conley, that was one of the things that he mentioned, and how 1968 represented not only a national championship year, but the first year that the Buckeye leaves were introduced to the Ohio State helmet.
Yeah, it would be interesting to note when stickers were invented, as opposed to when Ohio State started using them. So like how long that lag was between the existence of stickers and the use of them. I have no idea when they were invented, but I can tell you this: it's a fine tradition. Many fine Ohio State traditions. The Victory Bell, of course, as well, is one that a lot of people even forget about. But I would say that I will tell you the most fun tradition is that Mirror Lake jump, because it's just such great video and pictures come out of that every year. Obviously it won't be a thing going forward, which is a shame. But it was a thing that kind of, certainly it was after my time at Ohio State. But I will say that I have jumped in Mirror Lake on occasion during my college career, but it wasn't like a coordinated thing. My favorite tradition, and I don't think it's any surprise, is Script Ohio, and it's not just any Script Ohio; it's the Alumni Band Day Script Ohio, because then you get
the multiple.
Yeah,
yes,
you get one on each sideline and one in each end zone, and it just looks fantastic to have 4 of them. And it's always great to have the alumni band back, and there's always like some guy who plays trumpet who's like 101 years old out there, and it's really a cool day.
I certainly, to me, Script Ohio is my favorite. I'm gonna give my second one here in a moment, but the reason why I think of with Script Ohio, I was in Ohio Stadium when Jack Nicklaus was given the honor of dotting the I, and the only reason I'm bringing up that is I realize that it's always it's always one of these things where, okay, who gets to dot the I during the Michigan game, and I would certainly never want to take away from the band member who is honored to dot the I. I'm sure you're familiar with the late Beano Cook. He used to be a college football commentator. He used to say on many occasions before he passed away that when he would talk about all the different traditions in college football, he always used to speak glowingly about what it must be like to dot the I in Script Ohio. So to me, without question, Script Ohio is far and away my favorite Ohio State tradition. I guess just to be a little different, since we've been talking about it, I would say that it's relatively recent when you think about it in comparison to a lot of the other traditions. I will say that the singing of Carmen, Ohio after the game with the players is something that I'm tremendously grateful to Jim Tressel for implementing that tradition when he became the Ohio State's head coach back in 2001. Wasn't something that, like I said, that was always around. After the 2002 national championship, and I can assure you, I am used to dressing up for the bitter cold, being an Ohio guy, lifelong Ohioan. I actually was one of the many thousands of people that was in Ohio Stadium in January 2003 when the Ohio State national championship team was being honored by the fans, and at the time, all of the powers that be within the city of Columbus. But I was in attendance when former Ohio State linebacker C. Grant sang Carmen, Ohio on a very bitterly cold mid-January day. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it certainly, even though it was freezing cold, it was certainly well worth listening to C. Grant sing the alma mater for the last time. And I, in a previous podcast, we had C. Grant as a guest a few years ago, and I even told him, I said, I remember, because you could see it up on the Jumbotron, as C. Grant was singing, Andy Groom, who was the punter on that team, you could just see him weeping on the dais with the other players because he realized that was the last time that he was going to get an opportunity to participate and hear C. Grant sing Carmen, Ohio. So that's certainly a very, very heartfelt tradition. As I said, my daughter is very strongly considering Ohio State, and I know that it's something that she's looking forward to participating in as a Ohio State student.
Well, we'll see how good a dad you are when we see the daughter's commitment.
It's also, let's just say that the ACT scores. Let's keep Dad out of that one.
All right. Yeah, I know a lot of championship teams have periodic reunions, and I wonder if that team has a reunion, and it would be really cool to be a fly on the wall in one of those type events to just hear the stories that those guys tell.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine.
All right. Good stuff, Chip. I would say that my favorite tradition while I was at Ohio State, it was a me tradition, not an Ohio State tradition, was to go get the Euro after the night at the bars.
Okay. Well, see, I was going to say, I would think, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm going to guess that one of Gerd's favorite tradition was some kind of mug night at, the Outer Inn. The Outer Inn had many specials. I'm just guessing it might have been mug night, but he can speak for himself on that.
Well, I would tell you, back in the day at Papa Joe's, there was a Sunday night special where you could buy for like $2.95. You could buy a mason jar mug, and I don't know what it held, probably like 10 or 12 ounces or something. But you bought it and you get it refilled for a quarter. So you would get quarter beers all night. And when we started going, because Sunday nights were pretty dead before this special came along, and everybody kind of caught wind of it. The first, few months of this thing, there was just it was a small kind of quiet night. They played. There was no like DJ blaring dance music. It was just they put the radio on, and you would have plenty of empty tables, and me and my roommates and some of our friends would meet there. We'd play euchre, and it was like you could do that because it wasn't loud and crazy. And as things kind of caught on and people got wind of this Sunday night special, because it was just ridiculously cheap. For a couple of bucks you could drink all night, and they'd have like these big paper trays of peanuts you'd buy for a quarter also, and you would sit there and play euchre all night and have a great time. And then people started catching on. It started getting crowded. You'd have to get there earlier and earlier to get a table so you could play euchre, and then they'd have the DJ, and the dance floor was full and all that stuff. So That was a pretty cool tradition, and I still have my mug. And it was because usually you took turns going up to get the next round, so you would gather up everybody's mug. So of course all the mugs looked the same. You would we got creative, and everybody would sort of bring their own keychain to wrap around the handle. And mine was a was it Magic 99.7 FM keychain, and that is still on the handle of the mug as well.
And is the I guess you could say the fragrance of Milwaukee's Best or whatever kind of dreadful beer that you were drinking for a quarter still pungent?
Oh, I'm sure it had to be Old Milwaukee. I mean, that was like one of the 2 or 3 beers that Papa Joe's had was Old Milwaukee.
Absolutely,
so.
Of course. The things
so I'm
you would
sure
drink.
it was that. Yeah, I wouldn't drink that now. I mean, like,
well, nobody. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like there are standards. You have no standards when you're in college.
No. You go for cheap, and
that's exactly it.
And God bless Tony Gerdeman. He never grew out of that.
That's true.
All right. So, what was your favorite Chip Minnick tradition in college?
Oh wow! I was my favorite. Like I said, I really liked my times at the Outer Inn. Like I said, I mean, I just those were definitely those kind of visits were certainly among my favorite. I was also I don't really have the same kind of memories of Papa Joe's. I certainly remember bucket night, those kind of things. But yeah, many a good time at Ohio State. Put it that way.
Yeah. Well, when I was there, Papa's had buckets every night, and it was $5, and you filled it up with Old Milwaukee, and everybody dipped plastic cups in it all night.
Yes. Like I said, no standards at all.
And of course, 20 minutes after you got it, it was warm. So
yes.
Do you think the kids these days know that there was a basketball hoop at the Outer Inn?
No, I highly doubt it. Just the whole High Street, the whole atmosphere, and again, that's just one of the many things that you hear about people lamenting, that had experienced it before. Is High Street looks radically different.
Yeah,
radically different.
It seems much more upscale than it ever was.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's gorgeous. There's plenty to do. There's plenty to enjoy there. And I'm sure that the students there now love it every bit as much as we loved the stuff back in our day. Before, 2 of my favorite bars burned down under mysterious circumstances. But it's cool because there are companies that make T-shirts for these old bars that no longer exist. Like the Travel Agency was one of my favorite haunts. They had these $1 Long Island iced teas, and they were low quality. They don't taste anything like you would get in a nice bar, but they did the job. At the end of the night, you knew exactly how many you had, based on how many dollars were left in your wallet.
Yeah, it doesn't take much with Long Island iced teas.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been a trip down memory lane with Chip and Michael.
Yes.
Let's get back to your list of topics. And one of the interesting ones that you brought up was the thoughts on the publications picking Michigan to win the Big Ten instead of Ohio State. And I think that dovetailing along with this, I think it might have been Tom Fornelli. Somebody picked Ryan Day as the 10th best coach in the Big Ten.
All right. That is to be determined. I mean, we're going to see the results on the field. I highly dispute that, but that we'll see beginning August 30th, put it that way, as far as where Ryan Day ranks in comparison to the other coaches within the Big Ten. I think that is kind of a foolish ranking, but that, as I keep stammering over, I think we'll see beginning late August through the fall, and then we'll have a more accurate representation of where Ryan Day stands in comparison to the other coaches within the conference. Now, as it relates to publications picking Michigan, personally, I'm surprised. And I realize as an Ohio State podcast, we're going to have a tremendous amount of bias for the Buckeyes. But my surprise is I think so many people are giving credit to Michigan for what should be a change in offense with their new offensive coordinator and building around the skills and strengths of Shea Patterson and the presumption that Michigan will be much more dynamic offensively. And those are very valid, worthwhile reasons. However, when these publications were released, it was prior to the season-long suspension of Chris Evans at running back. Donovan Peoples-Jones had difficulty staying healthy, and I think was out all spring. Tariq Black at the other wide receiver has had injury issues. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea that the offense is necessarily going to be built around Shea Patterson, I certainly believe that will be the case. I think that remains to be seen how much better they are going to be, especially if somebody doesn't emerge at the running back spot, if Peoples-Jones and Black can't get on the field or stay healthy. And then when we look at the defensive side of the ball, they lost a lot of talent along that very vaunted defense that Ohio State put 62 points on. Mm-hmm. So that's where I look at it from a personnel perspective. Now, when I look at Michigan's schedule, they not only they have some intriguing games. I'm not even including the game against Ohio State at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. Army's coming to Ann Arbor the second week of the season. That is an Army team that gave Oklahoma all it could handle.
Right.
That's so you're talking there's a game that might be more interesting than I think a lot of people are realizing. Michigan goes to Wisconsin September 21st. That looks like a very challenging game for them. Then when you move into, and I'm just going off of some of the games that I know that I've written down in preparation for this, Iowa comes to Michigan the first weekend in October. Then you also have some other games, such as when Michigan goes to Penn State in the middle of October. That's going to be a whiteout game. I'm not sure if it's going to be necessarily a night kickoff with the way that the whole Fox contract has been set up, that maybe that they're not going to necessarily kick off at night, but that should be tough. Notre Dame comes to Michigan at the end of October. You have the Michigan State game in the middle of November. I mean, there are some games that I wouldn't necessarily are in the bank that are guaranteed wins for the Wolverines. That's for what that is worth. So mm-hmm. I think of when it comes to Michigan being favored, the fact is I believe that that the fact is they are coming off 7 straight losses to Ohio State. So all the pressure is going to be on them, not on Ohio State. The game's in Ann Arbor. They've lost 7 straight times. They're going up against a first-year head coach, and their glory boy quarterback return head coach has not beaten Ohio State since he's been back since 2015. All the pressure is going to be on the Wolverines. So mm-hmm. if you want to presume that Ohio State is facing an uphill battle, so be it. I mean, Ohio State was the underdog last year, and as I said a few moments ago, they put 62 points on the Wolverines. So I say let's see how the games all come out, because the reason the games are not played on paper is because they're played on the field.
Yeah. So my thoughts on this, Chip, are that it's easy to sit here and think if Michigan's going to ever do it, would this not be the year to do it? They've got a returning quarterback. They're playing against a first-year quarterback. Traditionally, first-year quarterbacks have not done great in this rivalry game. They've got a first-year head coach, even though he's got 3 games under his belt. They don't have that aura of Urban Meyer, even though he's still with the program. If not now, when? So it's a it's a sexy pick because the writers can then at the end of the year congratulate themselves on how we saw this coming if they're right, and if they're not, then they'll just put it on Harbaugh and say, well, he's not as good a coach as everybody thought, and clearly he's overrated, and Michigan should probably move on from him. And honestly, the pressure from within the program and from the fan base, if Harbaugh doesn't win the game this year, is going to be at an all-time high.
It will be, but I just don't know if Harbaugh can't get it done, who is out there that you can bring in that will get it done. Because, I mean, he's been given everything he's asked for. I personally, if I was the athletic director, I would probably say, hey, Jimbo, why don't we cut back on the trips to South Africa and France, and why don't we focus a little bit more on figuring out how to effectively block and tackle? Because here in beautiful Ann Arbor, that's just my opinion. I just think that at some point these trips around the world, what are you getting for what has to be an exorbitant sum of money?
Yeah. And he's been all about gimmicks since he's returned. I mean, he's climbed trees, he's had sleepovers with recruits. I mean, it's been very gimmicky, and there's been no substance to any of it. And this was a team that a lot of people this past year in 2018, a lot of people thought that Michigan team was good enough to beat Ohio State, and we saw what happened on the field. It was one of Ohio State's worst defenses in decades, and they still did plenty. I mean, obviously the offenses won the game, but the defense did enough to get off the field a few times and let the offense kind of run away with things.
I agree.
So, so that's my thought. My thought on the publications picking Michigan is because every year that Ohio State wins the conference, it just becomes one more year since Michigan won it, and so they're hedging their bets. They're like, at some point Michigan's going to win it, so that's why they're picking Michigan. And it's an easy thing to do this year with all the unknowns, but we'll get a pretty good sense by week 6 if Michigan has to worry about Ohio State or not.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I think by then we'll know what the quarterback's, all about, what the coach is all about, and it's not that Ryan Day hasn't been in that rivalry game and he's obviously embraced it already, and I'm sure they'll X out all the M's, which is another tradition we didn't talk about, all over campus and that kind of thing, and don't wear blue shirts into the Woody and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Chip. One of the things you wanted to talk about is who is the player on offense or defense that will emerge seemingly out of nowhere, like Malik Hooker did in 2016 or like Brendan White did last year. Do you see a player on this roster that will do that this year?
The guy that I am most intrigued with on this roster, and I mentioned him several podcasts ago, on the defensive side of the ball, is Josh Proctor. He was one of the most highly touted recruits a year ago, and he played primarily on special teams, but he kind of gained a reputation in high school as being kind of a ball hawking safety in a similar, kind of vein as Malik Hooker, like the idea that he could really cover the field. And I'm not really sure in terms of his tackling prowess, but that kind of ability to cover a lot of ground and make dynamic plays is something that Ohio State hasn't seen since Malik Hooker. And it's just a gut instinct on my part. I'm not trying to put more pressure on the young man than is already there. but I'm thinking Josh Proctor is my candidate is kind of this guy who is going to emerge on an Ohio State defense that, let's face it, is still very much a big question mark going into the 2019 season.
Yeah, that's not a bad pick. I think that it's not like it's a player that's completely unknown, and I'm not sure that Malik Hooker was completely unknown either. It's obvious that Garrett Wilson is a player that you would think of, but he's kind of a highly touted guy, so maybe he's not going to come out of nowhere if he does a lot of good things this year. I don't know. I'm looking down the lineup now. I think that there's some guys that could come in and make some big plays in in situations. We saw some nice performances in the spring game, which you could never really take anything from that. So there's a lot of variables. I don't know. I look down this roster and I don't know that there's a player that's going to just jump in and take everybody by storm. But I will say there's two players that could potentially that are familiar names that could potentially have where did that come from kind of seasons. One of those is Jocelyn Wint. Now, I just talked about the spring game. You remember Jocelyn Wint's performance in the spring game?
Yes, I was there.
And so this is a kid who could have one of those types of seasons where, he went, from zero to hero. And it's not like nobody knew who he was, but he could come out and have a big year. Another guy I think that could do that is a guy who has been around a while, and now that there's potentially some competent defensive coaching, he could turn things around and end up being a player that a lot of fans forgive, and that's Tough Borland. I think he's the type of player that could have a bounce back year and really come on strong.
I think now that Tough Borland is healthy, so many Ohio State fans, I think, were condemning Tough Borland's performance without giving him the benefit or the forgiveness, if you will, of the fact that he was coming off of a major injury to his Achilles. Mm-hmm. He probably wasn't healthy enough to play and kind of willed himself out there for the good of the team. And as Ohio State fans saw last year, the defensive staff, the scheme that they were putting the linebackers in certainly did them no favors. And then you throw in a guy he wasn't the fastest guy in the world to begin with, but now let's add to his detriment by giving him an Achilles injury to make him even slower. Mm-hmm. So I just think, I think Tough Borland, the redemption in the eyes of Ohio State fans is certainly very, very probable. It seems as though that Tough Borland is the odds-on favorite to be the starting middle linebacker for Ohio State. I think with better coaching, with a better scheme, that we'll see the Tough Borland who emerged a couple of years ago as a redshirt freshman and not necessarily the one who suffered through the injuries in 2018.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll tell you the player, Chip, that I want to come out of nowhere and just dominate and destroy and become a monster. It's not going to happen, but I want this to happen. Is a kid named Cade Kosherski.
Okay.
Cade is a linebacker from Dublin. He is the son of John Kosherski. Somebody put out on Twitter the other day, and I can't remember who it was, the question: if you could take one athlete through history and give them an injury-free career, who would it be? And I immediately thought of John Kosherski. Because here's a guy who was a dominating player at Ohio State when he was healthy, but he was hardly ever healthy. And I think that he could have had just an unbelievable career and potentially an unbelievable pro career as well.
Very interesting. Using that as a barometer, with injuries being kind of along those lines, somebody that I have met on previous occasions, and he was highly touted, and when I did meet him, he was a very engaging young man. Was Mike DeAndrea of Avon Lake, in the hometown that I am from and where I grew up. And I personally, prior to Mike's injury issues that plagued and ended his Ohio State career, I always felt that for all of the hype that Mike DeAndrea had as a middle linebacker, I always felt he would have been much better served at Ohio State playing in an outside linebacker position, kind of like the way, and that's not to take anything away from Bobby Carpenter, but, in that kind of role where he could, rush the passer and be more of a dominant force that way, because that's kind of some of the better performances that I saw of Mike DeAndrea playing for Avon Lake was in that role. Like sometimes it seemed as though when Avon Lake, when they were faced with some challenging moments, they would play Mike DeAndrea outside as more of as a defensive end, and all of a sudden he would just start wreaking havoc, and it just kind of was like, why don't you just play him there all the time? Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting point.
Another guy I think I would have loved to have had an injury-free career is Keith Byers, because I think he would have won a Heisman Trophy his senior year if he hadn't broken his foot, and he should have won it as a junior. Doug Flutie won it. I'm gonna get really, really angry if we talk too much about that, so I'm not going to. I get that I'm biased and Doug Flutie had good numbers, but Keith Byers was the freaking man.
Keith Byers, this will make you feel somewhat better, I hope, is from what I understand, when he came out of high school, he was just a tremendous all-around athlete, and I believe he, as a high school baseball player, was hitting 400. Obviously the results spoke for themselves on the football field as a tailback, and he was good enough even with the injury that he sustained that prevented him from playing as a senior. He was good enough to be drafted 10th overall in the 1986 NFL draft by Philadelphia.
And he broke the other foot the exact same way as rookie year.
That's right. And then even with all of that, he was able to play in the NFL for a number of years not only as a running back, but I think he was given the opportunity to play at tight end.
Yeah, he was a very, very good tight end.
And, I know he eventually made his way down to the Miami Dolphins. And I'm not sure that was kind of in the latter stages of his career, I believe. So my point being is even with the dramatic turn that his career took with injuries, he was able to, as we all often, that old expression about making lemonade out of lemons. I mean, he kind of exemplified that.
Yeah, I mean, he was just a monster running back. He's the guy who would hold the ball in one hand because he was just too damn strong for you to knock it out of his hand and that kind of thing. And he was a really good tight end in the NFL, a good sort of a fullback at times, a running back at times. He could kind of do a lot of different things, and those guys kind of stick around in the NFL longer than a lot of other guys that are only kind of good at one thing. And he was toward the end of his career when he went to Miami, but as a Dolphins fan, I can tell you he still had plenty in the tank. I've still got a few games, playoff games on VHS tapes where he played a prominent role in getting some wins. That was back when the Dolphins actually won playoff games, or actually went to participate in playoff games.
So now you're going to get yourself mad over something completely different.
Yeah, now I'm mad again. I'm mad about the draft again all of a sudden. All right, Chip, before we get out of here, why don't we talk a little bit about some kickoff times? Some of the kickoff times have been announced for Ohio State's games this fall. 6 of them, I believe, and you and I are going to go through these, and we're going to decide what time these games are going to kick off. The team will start with 3 straight nooners, which that's just the way it is. There's going to be a lot of noon games, and so Florida Atlantic at noon, Cincinnati at noon, and that's going to be a tussle. And then Indiana at noon, as we slide that first Big Ten game up into the middle of the traditional non-conference schedule. The first game we have with no start time is Miami of Ohio at Columbus in Ohio Stadium Are we getting another nooner? That seems like a nooner.
It would seem that it would be a nooner. I'm gonna say for sure it's going to be on the Big Ten Network, and the reason why I feel that confident is I believe that the Big Ten Network I think it's contractually obligated that a team will play at least one non-conference game on the Big Ten Network. So considering the fact that, as you said, Florida Atlantic is going to be a noon kickoff on Fox, the Cincinnati game is going to be a noon kickoff on ABC. The Indiana game, as you said, is a Big Ten Network. A Big Ten Conference game. That's on Fox.
It's on Fox.
So with Miami of Ohio being a non-conference game, I'm much more confident about the network that it's going to be on versus the kickoff time. So I'm going to say it's going to be on the Big Ten Network. My hesitation in calling it a noon game is simply because I think that is also when Fox is going to be televising Michigan at Wisconsin. Now, Fox being a major investor in the Big Ten Network, they may not necessarily want to have competing games against what they consider the biggest game of that weekend.
Right.
I know that Notre Dame is playing at Georgia, and that should be at night on CBS. So this might be. This sounds strange considering it's Miami University. It might be a 3:30 game on the Big Ten Network. That's just pure speculation on my part.
Yeah, I think it's a Big Ten Network game, and only because it can't be a MAC Network game. You're supposed to laugh at that, but it's fine. So Miami.
I love the MAC. I love the MAC. I'm of the opinion that Ohio State should schedule an in-state MAC opponent every year, but that's just me.
I have no problem with that. I mean, look what the SEC is doing, and look how they're being rewarded for it. So why not? So yeah, I think that might be a 3:30 Big Ten Network game. It would be really cool though if they just said, you know what, why not? We don't have a lot of night games. Let's do it at night.
That would be sweet.
Yeah, that'd be kind of a neat treat to have that be a night game in Ohio Stadium, and still could be on the Big Ten Network. I'm not sure what else is taking place that particular weekend. I have not looked at every team's schedule in depth the way you have, Chip.
I wouldn't say every team, but just it's one of those things that just kind of as soon as they start announcing the games, I scribble them down and in the little planner that I carry and just kind of. I'm not like you, like staying up and watching like Hawaii and all these games until the wee hours of the night. But I kind of strategically try to figure out my noon, my 3:30, my 7 p.m. So the weekend of September 28th. Here's a mystery: is the game at Nebraska, which I think you said the word tussle a few moments ago. Here's another one that I think is going to be a major tussle. Ohio State was lucky to escape with a win at home against Nebraska last year. I think Scott Frost is going to have these guys ready to go. Here's the mystery: is it wasn't that the kickoff time. I'm tremendously surprised that this wasn't picked up. I would think it would be a moral victory for Ohio State if this happened to be announced by Fox as a noon game. I think it would kind of indirectly help Ohio State not having to deal with the loud and rowdy fans of Nebraska for a night game. I'm genuinely surprised that it wasn't announced as a night game. We won't know for until I guess you could say the middle of September because that's just how it usually works. It could be a 3:30 game. Even then, that would be far better than a night game. But until then, I mean. It's purely speculative. I certainly believe it's going to be on a major network. This is going to be on Fox or ESPN or something like that.
Yeah, we'll know a lot about Nebraska by then as well, and what they look like. But I hope it's a 3:30 game. Here's why. Night game, you already mentioned why it would be not in Ohio State's best interest to play a night game in Lincoln. But a noon game also is not great for Ohio State out there. It never seems good when you travel and then play the early game. So you look at that and you also go, body clock wise, they'll still be on Ohio time, but it's not a 12 o'clock game there. It's only a 12 o'clock game on the East Coast.
Yeah, good point.
So it's a morning game, and those are the kinds of things that I think favor the team that's already in that time zone. But I could be wrong. Anyway, because they're used to playing at that time of day, and whoever does adjust well to the time change, even though it's not like you're going to California, whoever doesn't adjust well to that, it would affect them, I think, more than somebody who lives in that time zone and has played it in these what would be for them an 11 a.m. game, many times before. After Nebraska, we've got Michigan State. That's a night game in Ohio Stadium, 7:30 on ABC ESPN. Then Northwestern on a Friday, Chip. A Friday.
I'm angered about that. That's one of the bitter negative legacies of Jim Delaney, even allowing that to transpire. And I realize that there are a number of Big Ten teams that feel that this is giving them some much needed publicity. And I say to those Big Ten teams that want this, then reward them with this. But as somebody who loves Ohio high school football, I think Friday nights are a sacred thing for high school football. And I know that I'm certainly sounding like like the get off my lawn type of guy with this, but I'm not a lone voice in the wilderness shouting this one out. I can promise you that. I mean, a lot of the Ohio high school coaches wrote very strongly worded letters of anger and condemnation to the Big Ten. Gene Smith has heard about it, including other coaches from other areas of the Big Ten, like Pennsylvania. It's not a popular thing. It's a mistake. And Ohio State should have taken a leadership role in saying this is a mistake. We're not going to do it. We shouldn't do it. We should keep Friday night high school football sacred. And I'm hoping that this is something that will die rather quickly in the coming years.
I'm enraged, and I already have the first item on my grumpy old Buckeye for that game. So that game's on FS1, a Friday night game, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time against Northwestern. I think Friday night should be for MAC or the American Athletic Conference games or something like that. I don't think that Friday night is a Big Ten day to play football.
Like I said, I stand by what I said a few moments ago. I think Friday night high school football, to me, that's kind of, growing up around it, that's just the way I feel.
All right, so then, Chip, the 4 games immediately after the Friday night awfulness are all games without a start time to date, leading up to the Michigan game at noon on Fox on November 30th. So you got Wisconsin at home, Maryland at home, Rutgers on the road, and Penn State at home. So how do you see this sort of unfolding? The Maryland game is after a bye week, so you got Wisconsin and then bye week, and then Maryland, and then at Rutgers, then Penn State at home. So that's a string of home games with only the trip to Piscataway, breaking that trend.
Well, the Wisconsin game, this falls under the surprise that it wasn't announced, because there were a lot of Twitter, I don't want to say leaks, but there was a lot of things that this game is going to be on Fox, and it would be earlier in the day because October 26th is what would be a World Series game, and Fox has the World Series telecast that evening. So it eliminates the possibility of a night game. So there's strong speculation that this is going to be a noon game, but by the same token, this some other prominent games that are going to be taking place on October 26th. Notre Dame's at Michigan, and there's some speculation that will be a night game on maybe ABC or something like that. And then, Penn State's at Michigan State on that same day. So the Ohio State-Wisconsin game, I would think, would be a bigger draw. But that, who's to say what kind of factors into the minds of television executives. I'm going to stick with the fact that I think it's going to be a noon game on Fox. All
right. Yeah, it could be. That's a big matchup, and you would think that a lot of people would want to watch that. Maryland seems to me like bury that game at 3:30. There's got to be other games that they can show. And I don't know. What do you think about it? I don't know how Maryland's going to be this year, but I think at Columbus, I'm not concerned at this point, having not seen either team play yet this year.
Right, and the Maryland near upset of Ohio State, that was something that certainly lingered in my mind. I'm thinking that 3:30 sounds right. It also, considering just looking at on some other games that are taking place that week, that's also the same day as when Iowa's at Wisconsin. So it really kind of depends on how those teams are doing within the Big Ten West. And on a national scale, this would be on CBS. That's when the LSU at Alabama game is going to be taking place. So who's to say that, I think that game is usually a night game, but I've heard rumblings that might be actually a 3:30 game instead of a night game. So I think 3:30 on Fox seems like a good call.
Okay. Rutgers on the 16th of November at New Jersey. This seems like a Big Ten Network game.
It seems like a Big Ten Network game. There are so many games that I mentioned it a few moments ago that there are contractual obligations for how many appearances on the Big Ten Network. I think this certainly seems, based on the fact that the way that Ohio State has had their relative ease of handling Rutgers, it certainly doesn't seem like, okay, well, let's put this in prime time. I think this is going to probably be a noon game on the Big Ten Network on November 16th at Rutgers.
Yeah, that'll give Tony and Tom plenty of time to drive home from New Jersey.
There you go.
And November 23rd, Penn State. That is not going to be a night game because it's November 23rd, unless they relax kind of the restrictions that they've put on these night games. That doesn't seem to be a night game at Ohio Stadium. This seems like it has potentially noon Fox game written on it.
I agree with you, and I think it not only is something that if the easing of the contractual rules, I think both teams have to agree to it, and at least when it gets to November. I can't recall where I heard that or if I read it or something, that it when it turns to November, it's not only in the contract, but both teams have to agree to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of hoops to jump through, but personally, as an Ohio State fan, I wouldn't mind this being a noon game at Fox, and I'm just kind of playing amateur psychologist here, is that I would think for the Ohio State coaching staff, considering that you've got the game the following week, that you probably want to start focusing and game planning for Michigan as soon as possible. So having a noon kickoff, that means you're done around 3:30 in the afternoon, and you can, pour all your hatred and venom for the next week. Get that started early.
Yeah, well, they have the whole week after the Maryland game to prepare for Michigan because that's Rutgers week.
Let's see if the fighting Chris Ashes can put a better product on the field than they have in the last 3 years. To put it that way.
One thing we do know, Chip, is that Penn State game can't come down to the wire this year, because if it does, we've seen what happens to Ohio State teams the next game after a Penn State game goes down to the wire.
Yeah, we don't want to think about that. We certainly do not.
That cannot happen this year, or I think it's end times. I think end times will happen if that happens. But it's of course Harbaugh will be rooting for a white knuckle ride for the Buckeyes that week. And you say what you want about James Franklin, his teams have given Ohio State fits.
Yes, they have. And when you're talking about two straight losses of 1 point, for the last 2 years, I mean, there's got to be a lot of built-up hostility and animosity.
Yeah, Chip, speaking of James Franklin, there was some social media angst by Penn State fans at James Franklin wearing Vandy colors at the College World Series. But I will tell you this. I cannot fault a guy for rooting for a team that's playing against Michigan, because I do it every single week.
and let's not forget where James Franklin was prior to his current employment in Happy Valley. I mean, Vanderbilt was the program that gave him his coaching opportunity. So, and let's not ignore the fact that he might have some hostility for that team up north as well.
Now, as an Ohio State fan, Chip, is it better that Michigan got to within one win of a college baseball championship and lost, or would it have been better if they had flamed out early in the College World Series?
I prefer the former, that they got within, one win, and it's just so close. Just like it's just basically there was somebody that had, it's like that's kind of like the story of their life, is they just so close, but yet they can't close the deal.
It is more agonizing. I can tell you this from experience as a Cleveland Indians fan, that it is much more excruciating to be on the cusp of winning it and not winning it than it is to just not even have a chance.
Yes, you hit it right on the head.
All right, Chip. Is there anything else you would like to discuss in this June edition of the Silver Bullets podcast before we put this thing to bed?
No, I think we've covered we've run the gauntlet of just a wide variety of different subjects. Kids, if you're listening to this, you want to avoid the mistakes that Mr. Citro and I had, and drink quality beer. Don't drink Old Milwaukee. Don't drink Milwaukee's Best. Don't buy beer for a quarter. I mean, there's a reason why it's being sold at such a discounted price.
Yeah, it's the flat keg from the night before of the cheapest beer they have.
Oh,
it'll be interesting. I think you brought a lot of cool things up. I would like to invite all of our listeners to hit us up on Twitter and let us know what their answers to some of these questions would be.
That would be good.
You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Mike36Fan. Being a fan of Chris Spielman, that should be easy for you to remember. At Mike36Fan. You are at Chip Minnick, correct?
That is correct. Last name is spelled Minnich.
Yeah, and feel free to ask us questions. We will read your questions on the air on our next episode. So if you have any pressing questions about the Ohio State Buckeyes, just ask us. We'll give you an answer, and it might even be a correct answer. Who knows how that might turn out?
I make no promises.
Yeah, we will just do our best, and if we're right, we're right. But it's the off-season, Chip, and it's June, which means our next show we will do in July. Then we will do a show in August, and August is, of course, a month that has college football in it.
We are one step close. We're getting ever so closer to the beginning of college football season, as Gerd and Tom Orr said that. I believe Big Ten Media Days are kind of like the middle of July, and then the next thing you know, it's all right. You've got fall camp in August, and as you said, August means at the end of the month we have college football. So we're getting there. Like this, it's just you gotta just keep one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So of course, Chip, we will. Before we sign off, we'll let people know where they can find you on the internet. We already talked about your Twitter.
Yes. Like Michael, I'm a contributor to the ozone.net, and I also contribute periodically for Athlon Sports.
Yep, I also write for the Ozone, and the Hayes and Cannon section is where you can find my Grumpy Old Buckeye columns that I release for every game. I talk about all of the things that made me want to go out and shake my fist at the clouds and yell at a bunch of kids to get off my lawn. Even when things are pretty great, there's always something I can grump about.
As we all can.
Yes. All right, well, that will do it for the June edition of the Silver Bullets podcast here in 2019. We've got July to get through, and then we are in college football month of August, and we will probably have some sort of I'm guessing we'll have some sort of a season preview right around the middle of August, and then, of course, we will pick up the week before the first game with returning to a weekly format. Does that sound good to you, Chip?
Sounds wonderful.
All right, well then we'll do it, because I was on the fence about it, but now that you're on board, I'm gonna do that myself. I'm gonna jump on board, and I would tell people this: if you want to read something cool, one of the things I found pretty cool is Tom Orr wrote a piece on theozone.net, and he had a really cool piece of the most recent Buckeye from every county in the state of Ohio. I thought that was a great topic, and I was certainly intrigued and wanted to dive right into that. So I recommend that. Tom, have you read anything lately that you want to promote?
I thought Tom's complimenting Tom. I sent him a quick note, saying it was a terrific job about that, because I know that was not something that was just very quickly and easily done. I mean, he had to do some extensive research. People, of course, were quick with the negative comments, but then it was kind of the evidence showed that they hadn't bothered to actually read the article. So it kind of proved the point. You want to, before you condemn, you want to make sure you know all the facts. But besides, Tom's work, I think both Tom and Gerd, we talked at the beginning of the podcast, the recruiting commitments are coming in, not necessarily fast and furious, but they are coming in. And, it seems more than likely by the time we get together again for a Silver Bullets podcast that Ohio State's 2020 recruiting class will have grown more in numbers. And I don't want to presume anything, but it would not be surprising if the 2021 class adds some additional players as well.
Yeah, all kinds of real momentum is the word I'm looking for from this coaching staff and their relentless recruiting efforts. It's almost like Urban never left.
And that's a tribute to the program that he built, and I give credit to Ryan Day for not only taking what Urban Meyer left behind, but tweaking it and adjusting it to suit his needs and what he perceives Ohio State's needs to be for 2019 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. All right, great job, Chip. You got anything going on between now and I don't know, I'm guessing mid to late July when we reconvene? You got any big family holidays, anything like that going on?
Well, I hope, like for you as well as for our loyal listeners, a happy and safe 4th of July. For you kids out there, the name is Jason Pierre-Paul, and you want to be safe when it comes to firecrackers and fireworks and things like that. But in all seriousness, the 4th of July, a lot of swim meets for my daughter. I can only speak as an Ohioan. It has been a brutally wet spring, so we're finally kind of coming out of those doldrums and having what we would consider beautiful sunny weather. So just hoping to enjoy a nice, pleasant summer with a lot of swim meets, a lot of cooking out, and drinking some quality summer beers that you would not find at Papa Joe's or any of the other establishments that we talked about. Certainly not for a quarter, I can promise you that.
Absolutely. It's great that you brought up Jason Pierre, Paul, because you never want to be a cautionary tale, but I mean, this is a guy who he made a living with his hands and his physique, and it didn't cost him his career, but I would say it cost him some effectiveness in his career after that fireworks accident. So be careful out there. I let the professionals handle that. I know a lot of people like to enjoy lighting off fireworks. I'd rather just sit around with a beer and watch other people do it.
I am with you 100%.
All right. Go check us out at iTunes. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. And we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us maybe some ratings and reviews. That's how we get our podcast in front of more listeners. If you want to do something for us at absolutely no cost to yourself, just leave a rating and review on iTunes, and that can really help us out. Right now, we only have 22 people have rated us, Chip.
Well, we need more than that.
Yes, we do. To our listeners' credit, hey, thanks. We're a 4.5 out of 5.
Okay, but
so I imagine it was a 5 out of 5 until I took over as co-host.
Oh no, not at all, not at all.
All right, that will do it. The Silver Bullets is in the can for June 2019. We'll do it again in July. Thank you, Chip, and we will sign off the way we always do by saying, "Go Bucks!"
Go Bucks!